Hello there, this is James Oscorff, News 1978, welcoming everyone to another episode of my podcast series Ujames Recommends, in which I recommend a film to a friend of mine, we watch it together, and then they give their opinion of it. It's as simple as that. So in this episode, I'm joined by my good friend Nelson. We've just finished watching Barry Lyndon, the picaresque 1975 masterpiece directed by Stanley Kubrick, which is, in my humble opinion, the greatest movie that he ever directed in his life, and a serious contender for the title of greatest movie ever made. As always, this podcast will contain spoilers, so if that bothers you, then I've linked to a free copy of the movie down in the underbar. That being said, however, I still ask everyone to support the studio by paying to view the film legally, and having hopefully made all of that clear, Nelson, what are your thoughts on this movie?
James, I'm actually glad because I've never watched the full movie, Barry Lyndon. I was extremely pleased with the cinematography, the character development. Everything about the movie spoke to me. It resonated in my mind and in my heart that people can rise and fall and still become a character. They can still portray themselves or a character with such aplomb. Mm-hmm. Ryan O'Neal did such an exceptional job playing this character, and I couldn't have asked for a better movie to watch with you.
Yes, move aside, Citizen Kane fanboys. I think you'll find that this is the greatest movie ever made.
It's close, because having watched Citizen Kane and now Barry Lyndon, the ability of the writers of those two movies were exceptional.
Well, my criticisms of Citizen Kane are a matter of public record, so let's just stick to the praise.
Skip that one. Okay.
Yeah, skip to the praise of Barry. Stick with the praise of Barry Lyndon.
I was very, very filled with wonder at how the writers of Barry Lyndon developed the characters. Mm-hmm. They showed a very insightful way of depicting someone who started out very poor, mm-hmm. who became a man of means, albeit through sometimes devious methods, but showed his humanity.
Yeah. Oh, and just to say, because you said the writers, plural, that the whole film was written, produced, and directed by Stanley Kubrick himself. You know, this is a one-man show. Of course, the credit for the original novel, the story of Barry Lyndon, goes to William Makepeace Thackeray, the English novelist who wrote the original novel, The Luck of Barry Lyndon. But no, Kubrick himself wrote the screenplay, and this is his work entirely.
I have watched many of Stanley Kubrick's movies. Mm-hmm. I have a love of his science fiction, mm-hmm. his ability to develop characters and develop the overall ambiance. And this movie goes above and beyond any of his other ones.
Yes, if we can't agree that this is the greatest movie ever made, we can at least agree, I hope, that this stands out as the jewel in the otherwise glittering Stanley Kubrick crown.
I was very surprised because the cinematography mm-hmm. just blew me away. How
Yeah, the phrase which people often use to describe Kubrick's work, every frame is a painting. Yes, every frame in Barry Lyndon is a painting. He's
Oh,
studied.
undoubtedly.
Yeah, he's studied
Very,
18th century art. He used the most beautiful landscapes throughout Europe.
and with Barry Lyndon, not only did Stanley develop the individual characters of the lead actors, but with the other actors, he showed a sense of reality that would be hard for an American to understand.
Yes,
I mean,
as an American watching this film, satirizing this picaresque film, satirizing the English nobility of the 1800s around the time of the American Revolution, what advice would you give to other Americans? What points do you fear that they would miss?
I fear that they would miss the nuances of how many other how English nobility, how they, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the word, how they accepted and rejected people.
Yes.
Trying to move up in class.
Absolutely.
And how they characterized other people that they were not willing to accept. And in the movie, how they put Barry Redmond to the side, and without making it obvious. It's in the one scene in the men's club, and Barry was trying to get the one lord to come over to the mansion.
Yeah.
And, oh, I'm sorry, but I have to check my schedule. I have to check my book. But I'm sure that I have an engagement that evening.
Yeah. Yeah, that was something I took pains to point out to you. Of course, you got it, but I can imagine many Americans watching that. Unless you're English, it might be difficult for people to understand just how cold and brutal that dismissal was. The narrator actually says after that scene, which looks very polite and cordial to the untrained eye, the un-English eye, if Barry had killed Lord Bullingdon, he could scarcely have been met with more coldness and resentment, which now followed him in town and country. Yeah.
Oh, that was that line in itself was the fulcrum on which the movie hinged.
Well, no, I would disagree with that. I would say that the one line which sums up the film perfectly is, Barry was born one of those clever enough at gaining a fortune, but incapable of keeping one, because the talents and energies which lead a man to achieve the first are often the very cause of his ruin in the latter case. Because he'd brought himself up through his wit, his guile, his cunning, through deception, through cheating, through violence, actually, if you remember, as a gambler, dueling with the nobles of Europe who refused to pay their debts. It was his swordsmanship that, how did the narrator put it, maintained the honour of the firm, so to speak. But, no, he, having gambled absolutely everything on the hope of gaining a peerage, of becoming a nobleman and thus having lands and thus an income himself, his own property, buying lands at 10 times their value, lavishing money here and diamonds there, buying paintings and articles of virtue at ruinous prices. Lord Bullingdon, his stepson, insulted him in front of all of his friends, all of these people who he'd literally been bribing in order to put a good word into the king. And yes, in response, Barry attacked him, beat Seven Shades of shit out of him, and yes, if Barry had killed the boy, he could scarcely have been met with more coldness and resentment than now followed him in town and country.
That line in the men's club,
yeah,
and the line you just mentioned, they are pivotal points in the movie.
Absolutely, and a third one in the same vein. If I could remember, I'm not sure if I could remember the exact quote. This was when the bills and debts suddenly arrived with a hasty unanimity. Their amount was frightful. All of the mortgages and insurances that Barry had been accumulating, chasing after his peerage. As I say, he'd gambled absolutely everything on the hope that the king would say, yes, you can have this piece of land and be Lord Barry Lyndon of such and such a place, and thus have tens of thousands of pounds a year.
Now, let me ask you a question. Being an American,
yeah,
and understanding minimally, but what would cause the king at that point in history to grant someone a peerage?
Liking him. It's as simple as that. The king, up until around the 1900s, had the power to hand out peerages, to hand out ownership of land, the same way that Trump hands out ambassadorships or cabinet nominations.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
you see, because
so
money buys influence here in the United States.
Yes, but
and
go ahead.
And in England, if I'm not mistaken, at times it could be campaigns of war or some special service that someone gave to the nation.
Oh, absolutely.
And then they would
absolutely.
Granted a peerage.
Today, peerages and honours, they're called knighthoods, OBEs, CBEs. They're little more than symbolic. They're basically ceremonial. But back then, as I say, a peerage came with a large chunk of land from which you would then gain revenue. Britain at that time was still almost entirely agrarian. Feudalism, remember, was the question of those who owned the land and those who worked the land. The lords, the dukes, the barons, the kings were the people who owned the land.
And the people who worked the land paid a tax set by that person who had the peerage.
Mm-hmm. It's not really not a tax per se, but it changed throughout history. But for 3 days of the week, they would tend to their own crops, which they would just grow to survive. The other 3 days a week, not counting Sunday, they would tend to the Lord's crops, because it was their crops. It was the Lord's produce that was the source of their wealth.
and whether that produce was animals
Yeah.
or
Crops.
wheat or crops,
Yeah.
the 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 lord of the mansion or the lord of that area received that produce from the land
Exactly.
as his payment for allowing the people to live on the land.
Yes, as one character in a British comedy series called Blackadder, set around
Oh, yes.
around the same time, put it perfectly. How would you like to earn some money? I don't want to earn money. I'm nobility. I want other people to earn it and then give it to me. Because that is the feudal system in a nutshell.
That was.
Yeah.
And as the Industrial Revolution started, more and more people moved to coal mining, moved into industrial jobs, and people who lived on the land were bereft of a goal.
Yeah.
Because they switched from working for a peer or the landlord to working for the capitalist owner.
Yeah. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss.
Yeah, meet the new. Who was it? The Who?
Yeah.
Meet the old boss, same as the new boss. You know, and it was and that showed the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, where some people were starting to move away from land, but still they needed the money, which they didn't have access to.
Yeah.
There was an upper class, and then there was everybody else.
Yes, but having spent the last podcast, about 75% of the last podcast talking about Trump and capitalism and the evils of the 1%, let's focus on the film this time, shall we, just for a change of pace.
No problem.
Yes,
that's good.
Yeah, and one thing that you did comment on both at the beginning and at the end of the movie was the music.
The music. I am a lover of classical and period music, and especially done on period instruments.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
It was an enormous opus. Whoever scored the music, whoever wrote the music, had an ear for that period, being the mid 1700s to the 1800s.
Yeah.
And it was not only was it wonderful to listen to, it was enchanting.
Absolutely. It just captured and expressed the soul of the film so well. It did everything that movie music is supposed to do.
Absolutely.
It didn't overwhelm the film, nor did it fade into the background and just become incidental.
It's hard to express because words do not do justice.
Yeah.
To the score, the score of Barry Lyndon. You have to listen to it.
Yeah, and words don't do justice to the cinematography. Yeah, words do not do justice to the cinematography or scenography of Barry Lyndon. The set, so there were no sets. It was filmed entirely on location with new cameras and new film, so that they could film entirely in natural light. As was said before, every frame was a painting. You know, Stanley Kubrick, the director who famously took 128 takes to shoot one scene because he was such a perfectionist. This was the peak of his perfectionism. I've seen this film about 100 times. The only scene that has ever stood out as being wrong, as not quite fitting, as not blending perfectly into it, is just after Barry's son is thrown from his horse. Barry tells one of the stable hands or one of the other underlings, ride like the devil for the doctor and tell him to come at once. Cut to the scene of the stunt rider saying, yes, sir, jumping onto the horse and riding away. That scene just doesn't quite fit. It's obviously filmed on a different quality of film than the rest of the... Yeah.
Plus, it was rushed.
Yeah.
It didn't allow for any emotion.
Mm-hmm.
There was no...
Yeah.
The viewer did not have any way to grasp the emotion of that scene.
Absolutely. So it was just that one cut scene of the stable hand or whoever he was saying, yes, sir, jumping, and not acting very well because he was obviously a stunt rider, not an actor, saying, yes, sir, yeah, jumping onto the horse and riding away. That one scene, are you aware of the YouTube channel Cinema Sins? Sorry, every video they make is analysing everything wrong with a certain film in 20 minutes or less. They go through and they list all of the mistakes, all of the inconsistencies, everything that failed, all of the continuity errors, so on and so forth in a given film, all of the plot holes, etc. So I can just imagine, though, Cinema Sins trying to analyse Barry Lyndon and saying, nope, there's only one sin in this entire film, only one thing that doesn't quite work. Everything else is flawless.
That scene.
Yeah, everything else is absolutely flawless.
I'm grateful that you asked me to do this,
mm-hmm.
because I had to focus on the movie.
Yeah.
And focusing on the movie gave me a better way of considering it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an enormously... It's not long when you start watching it. You say, oh, 3 hours, and then they become engrossed in the character of Redmond Barry.
Mm-hmm.
They become enchanted with him because he becomes a hero, rising above his status, rising above his station in life.
Mm-hmm.
And how he does that without dying is the amazing thing.
One thing I feel compelled to point out, of course, because you used the word hero, even though one of my latest videos was explaining the fact that, no, you can be a hero and be a bad person. You know, this idea that heroes are all altruistic and benevolent supermen is a myth.
I would put it this way. Even heroes have character flaws.
Mm-hmm. But the point I feel compelled to make, though, as I say, is Teresa hates Barry Lyndon because he is such an abusive bastard to his wife.
Yes.
Yeah. At one point in the film, the narrator says, although Barry may have had his flaws, no man could say of him that he wasn't a tender and loving father. To which, hearing that, Teresa literally said whilst watching the film, yes, but he treated his wife like shit.
And he treated his stepson
like shit, absolutely.
Like shit. He treated his own son like a jewel.
Absolutely, precisely because he was his son, even more so than today when patriarchy is everything.
Yes, and England at that point was very much a patriarchal society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so was it? I wasn't entirely sure. Sorry, but go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. It was a patriarchal society. Women held very lower status than
Oh,
sometimes
yeah,
workers.
seriously, we they're stating the obvious, and then they're saying, "Wow, this is water. Water is wet." but but yeah,
But even so, some people don't really know history that well. So Barry Lyndon is an eye-opening movie.
yeah,
I mean, Stanley Kubrick wrote it on a level that he had never reached before or since.
absolutely. So many of his works are adaptations, but this is, I believe, the pinnacle of an adaptive movie.
And it was what it couldn't have been written any better. Like I said, it's hard to describe something that somebody hasn't watched, but once they do, they're able to show somebody, a different person, that yes, Stanley was a cinematic genius, and he was quite the man, and if I'm not, did Stanley ever win an Oscar?
Let me just check. He won Best Visual Effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey. He was nominated a shit ton of times. Nominated, 3 times for Barry Lyndon. Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Writing Adapted Screenplay. But he didn't win any of them, to which I say, bastards! Academy, you had one job! I don't know.
Watch the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, did you hear about that scandal either last year or the year before? The Academy voting on films without even some members of the Academy voting on film, admitting that they vote on films without even watching them.
Oh, that was extremely horrendous.
Yeah.
There's no other way to put it. How could you vote on a movie or judge a movie without even seeing it?
Yeah.
But
Stanley
if you're going to
Kubrick
recommend a movie,
yeah,
like Barry Lyndon, people need to see it.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Zhivago was another movie that had a long time span, and it showed a true love that was going on through the beginning of the Russian Revolution. Here we have a movie beginning at the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution, and the time frame just it was amazing. And to be able to show those scenes, those paintings in a frame, I was very, very pleased to have been able to watch it with you.
Absolutely. Well, I feel the same way. The feeling is mutual. No worries at all there, my friend. And yeah, I can just imagine the members of the Academy going, wow, 3 hours, no, just give it to the other nominee. Ah!
Yes. Because they truly missed out.
It's such a...
If the Academy members didn't watch Barry Lyndon, it was to their detriment.
Absolutely. And yes, one point I would also like to make is that having only recently learned the meaning of the term picaresque narrative or picaresque novel, when I looked up the original novel, The Luck of Barry Lyndon, on Wikipedia, it turns out that yes, although I'd suspected it, it is officially a picaresque novel, and picaresque coming from the Spanish word rogue or rascal, used to describe a novel such as Huckleberry Finn, in which the point of the story is we follow a roguish, immoral character through an exploration or a satire of the society in which they live. So the point of Barry Lyndon is obviously it's a satire of the English nobility. It's showing the corruption and the immorality at the heart of what is supposed, or what at that point proclaimed itself to be the heart of civilization. Jack Quinn at the beginning, being an Englishman and a man of property, believing himself to be, and believed by the Irishmen around him to be, superior solely because he was English. It's very well if you... Sorry?
Plus, he had a £1,500 income.
Exactly, per year. Yeah.
He had an income of £1,500, and that was the thing that eventually led to Barry's downfall.
That being the great synergy. Well, not his downfall, his rise, but the beginning of his adventure being marked by a duel, and then at the end of the film, the end of his adventure and his true downfall being marked by another duel.
Absolutely.
Wonderful synergy there. But...
it was a very wonder-filled movie, because you looked at the vast panorama of the landscape. You looked at the character development of each of the characters, and the two-faced attitudes towards Barry by his own family.
Yeah.
And then you wonder, why did he become the way he became? Well, he did it because he had no father to guide him. He had a sense of his own honor, but not somebody else's.
I would argue that I think the point of the story is that by struggling to become a gentleman, by struggling to become a member of the English nobility, power corrupts. It's kind of like the saying, power corrupts absolutely. That in his strive to reach the pinnacle of English society, that required him to become more and more immoral. That at the beginning he was a relatively honourable man, but by the
end of the movie, he wasn't honourable.
He'd lost absolutely everything. Oh, and I think one thing which showed just how the one scene which showed just how broken he was when Lord Bullingdon had demanded satisfaction, which was the euphemism for challenging another gentleman to a duel in a country in which duelling was officially legal. After Lord Bullingdon had accidentally fired his shot into the wall, his gun had gone off half-cocked, literally. Barry Lyndon took his turn to fire and fired into the ground, and you could just see
expecting not to be shot at.
No, he did. If you look into his eyes, both when Bullingdon challenges him and when he's firing into the ground, his son is dead. He's got nothing else to live for. He wants to die. He just doesn't have the courage to do it himself.
So an interesting point of view. I'll have to watch. I'm going to have to watch this movie
Yes,
again.
the first time I saw it, I did think, yes, he's shot into the ground because he doesn't want his wife to have to bury another son. But no, the more I watch it, the more I become convinced that he's suicidal. Yeah.
Yeah, I will watch it again. I can promise you that.
I do believe you have to go soon, so is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up this podcast?
Well, let me say this to the people who watch this pod or listen to the podcast. Please take the time to watch this movie. You will not regret the time that you spend, because it is an enormously great movie.
Yeah.
I was very pleased to take the time to watch it with my friend James.
And I'm genuinely glad that this has been such a positive experience for you. I can only echo your call for everyone to take the time to watch this, because it is such a worthwhile investment. Thank you once again, Nelson, for joining us. And until next time, when I'll be discussing another movie with another friend, it was in the reign of King George III that the aforementioned persons lived and quarrelled. Good or bad, handsome or ugly, rich or poor, they are all equal now.